In modern React development, hooks are how we breathe life into components, giving them the power to manage state, respond to events, and interact with the browser, all without writing a single class. One of the most fundamental and powerful hooks is the useState. It is the go-to tool when your component needs to keep track of something that can change over time, like whether a model is open, what a user typed into a form, or how many times a button was clicked. Think of useState as a way to give your component a memory, a way to remember things between renders. In this lesson, we'll explore how useState works by building a simple example using Next.js with App Router and TypeScript, the modern stack for React developers. And without further ado, let us dive in. We'll be using Visual Studio as our code editor. We'll also be using Next.js since Next.js is the official React framework. To get started with our project, we need to create a project folder. You can just create a project folder inside your desktop, then drag and drop inside your Visual Studio code. I have created a folder and I've named it state hook. Great. Ensure that it's an empty folder. The next thing is pretty easy. Just click on these three dots, terminal, then new terminal. Inside the terminal, you're going to paste a command to create a Next.js project. And to do that is very easy. So you can just go inside the browser and you can search for Next.js. Great. Then when you click on it, you'll find guidelines on how to install it. As you can see, it's pretty easy. We have this command. Therefore, you can just copy this command, then go back inside your project, and we need to paste it here. So you can just do this npx create next app at latest. This command is going to create the latest version of Next.js. Finally, just put a space, then a dot. This dot is very important. It ensures that this project will be created inside the state hook folder. Great. You can just press enter. After installing Next.js, we need to run the project. So to do that, it's pretty easy. You can just do npm run dev. Ensure that you're inside your project folder. Great. Then you can just press enter. Great. We can see that our project is running on localhost 3000 and the version of Next.js is version 15.3.4. The next step is pretty easy. We can just move inside our browser and then we can search for localhost 3000. Great job. And when you see this, that means your Next.js was created successfully. Good job. The next thing you need to do is just move inside this state hook and then you can find the app, and this page.tsx is our home page. So we need to strip this one down to a bare minimum. So you can just move inside this return. This is the code that you've just seen in localhost 3000. You can collapse this div, and then I'm going to delete it. We're going to have our own div. Great. We can have a h1 inside, and then you can just say use state hook. Great job. We do not need the image, therefore I'm going to delete this image. Great. Then we can provide some styling. So you can just move inside this h1. You can just do a class name. We're using Tailwind CSS. Great. And we can say text. We want a bigger heading, so you can say text 3XL, and we can also say give a color of the text. So you can say text. You can provide colors such as an amber, and then you can say a value of 500. Great. And when we refresh, you can go back inside our browser. We should only see this useState hook. Let me add examples at the end. Great job. Let us move back inside our browser. Beautiful. We have useState hook. This is just a heading, but I want to make it at the center. So you can just add some more styling. You can just say text center. After having this h1 tag, and it's just a title, useState hook examples, we can open our browser and we can see actually have the title here, useState example. To understand useState, we're going to consider the first very basic example of a button. we want when we click a button, it increments its value. Let's say it had shown a value of 1. When we click, we want it to increase from 1 to 2 to 3 and so forth. Great. The first thing you have to do is whenever you're working with hooks in Next.js, you have to declare your function as useClient. So you can just mark it at the top here as useClient. Great. The next thing we need to do is to declare a variable. So you can just say constant count and a function to set the count. So you can say set count. Ensure that count starts with capital here, as much as we have here in small letters. Great. And the next thing we have to say, it's going to use useState, but first need to import useState from React. So ensure that you've imported useState here at the top. So you can just use it like that, and you can provide an initial value of 0. But since you're using TypeScript, we need to provide the type of count. So to do that, it's pretty easy. You can just type here number before the 0. Great. That means that count is of type number. If it was a string, you can just pass it here as a string. Good job. The second thing, you can just have below the h1, you can have a h2, and you can say this is a count example. Count example. Great. And then you can just copy the styling of the h1. So you can just highlight this class name here. We want to reuse the same styling, and inside the opening tag of h1, you can just paste it here. We don't want a color of amber. We can just change, let's say, to green. I think green is good. And instead of, this is text 3xl, sorry, like that. Great. So this one can be text 2xl. Good job. The next thing we need to do is just to put a button. So we need a button that will be used to increment the value of this value of count. We can just say increment. Great. And then just above the button, we can have h3 tag, and we can say count like this. Ensure you have curly braces, count. Great job. Therefore, this count is going to track the value of count that is going to show whenever we click the button. Great. We need to add a functionality to the button. But before that, let us see how it looks. Great. As we can see, we have, this is a count example, and I think I should improve the styling. Now, this is the initial value of count, which is 0 that we have just set, and this is a button. We can add some more styling to make it visible. So you can just go back inside your application, and then you need to provide the same styling. Therefore, I can just use the same styling for simplicity. I can copy these stylings, and then great, and then you can just add it for count. You can just do this. Great, and we can just do this. Instead of just saying the count, the value of count, we can say the count is, and then we need to pass the value of count. Great job. Great. The next thing is just to provide some styling to this button. So you can just do class name. We can style this button by giving it a padding. So you can just do padding in the X direction and a value of 400. Great. And then you can just save. Now when you check our application, you can see at least we have the increment button here. I want us, when we click on this button, this value should increase. Great. Let us include that functionality. So inside this button, you can add an on click. So we can say on click. Great. And inside it, we're going to have an arrow function that is going to take this function. We're going to use this function to set the value of the count. Great. Let us see it actually in practice. So we're going to have an arrow function inside it. So you can just do an arrow function like this, and then you're going to call this function set count. And we need to do something here. So we want to take the initial value of count and then increment it. So what you can do is we're going to take count, then we're going to increment with one value. Great. So whenever we click this button, it's going to increase by 1. You can either increase or decrease. Great job. Let us see it in practice. So when we move back inside the browser, after refreshing, when you click, you can see that the count is increasing. So when I click here, we have a count is 2, count is 3, and so forth. Great job. Let us test for decreasing. So to decrease is just simple. You can just do a minus here. Great. Then you need to save. Then go back inside your browser. Then you click decrease. You can see that the value is actually decreasing. And one good thing is you can see it stores the value. Even if you change something, it just stores the value. Great job. And that has been first example of useState. It's pretty easy to use, and you cannot actually develop an application without managing state. It's typically impossible, because whenever you're working with an application, it's important that you manage state. In the next example, we're going to talk about how useState can be used to manage visibility. Let's say you want to manage when something is going to be visible and when something is not going to be visible. So you can just do a cleanup of this code and you can change. So you can first need to declare a variable here. So I'm going to delete that. I'm also going to delete this inner function here. Let me delete this part. We're also going to have a button, therefore I'm not going to delete this button. Great. Then we need to declare a variable. We can say constant like this, and then we can have visible. So we want to manage visibility, and a function set, and then capital letters, set visible, and we're going to use useState. Great. And the initial value is going to be false. Since you're using TypeScript, you need to provide the type of this visible. So you can just do this. Visible is a boolean, therefore you can just do boolean like that. Great. And useState is capital S. Good job. Great. The next thing is pretty easy. So we need to first have this function that you're going to use. So let me first delete this count, because we are no longer working with count. You can just delete that. And you can just write here, this is example 2 for visibility. Or you can even just say for toggling visibility. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to have a button. We already have a button here. And inside visibility, so we have this button we have provided, and this one is not going to be increment. So we need to change it to message. We want to either see whether we're going to hide the message or show a message. Great. And inside the on click, we can have this function, still an arrow function. So you can have an arrow function, and then we're going to call this function here set visible. So you can just say set visible. Great. And inside it, we're going to invert the state. So we need to invert the state of visible. So you can just say visible like that. Great. Now the next thing we can do is inside before we show the message, we can have something that is going to track the changes. So we need to check, is visible true? So you can use a question mark like that. If it is true, then we can just put this message here and say hide. Great. And if it's not, you use a colon, then we can just say show. Great. Just like that. So we have is visible true. If it's not, you can say hide. Otherwise, we just say show. Great. Another thing we can add is we can add a condition here just below the button by consuming the value of visible. So we can also check if it is visible, then we can show a message using a p tag. So you can just say a p tag like this, a HTML p tag for paragraph. Great. And inside it, we can have this message. You can say this is, you can just say this is the message. Great. Then you can just save and check inside our browser. So I can just move here. So when I click here, we should see, so we have this button here, show message. When I click it, we should see here, show message. Great. Let me just click it. Great. You can say this is the message, and you can also hide the message. So when you click here, the message is hidden. Great job. And that has been the second example on useState. In the third and final example, we're going to see how we can use useState to control the form input. I'm going to delete this. We're not going to work with buttons. I'm going to delete that, and I'm going to change this one. It's going to be example 3. It's not for toggling visibility, but it's for form inputs. So example 3 on form inputs. Great. And then we're not going to have this. Since you're going to work with form, you can just leave the rest as it is. Great. We're going to use a variable called name. So we can say constant name and a function to set the name. So we say set name, but starting with capital letter. You can just say set name, and then it's going to have a useState, and the value is going to be an empty string, the initial value. So you can just put an empty string like that. So when you're working with JavaScript, this one is going to be actually very correct. But since you're working with TypeScript, we just need to introduce a type and say it is of type string. So you can just do string like that. Great job. The next thing, you can just have an input here. HTML input form. Great. Type can be left out as text, just as default. Great. Now we need to provide the value as name, so we can just do name. Great. The next thing is a function. So the function is going to be onChange, and as always, inside it, we're going to pass the input, and we need to use this function setName. So you can just call this function setName inside the arrow function. So you can just do setName and then e.target.value. Now that we have this function, is going to change that. So just below it, we can have a placeholder. So you can just do placeholder, and you can say enter your name. Enter your, let's say, first name or something like that. It will do. Finally, we can just have a p tag for paragraph, and you can say hello, and this one is supposed to display your name. So you can say hello, and inside it, we can pass the value of name. Great. All right. But we can also pass something else. So if we do not have name, we can pass something like stranger. Great. At first, you're not going to have a name, so we expect it to be stranger because we do not have any value since it's an empty string. Great. Let us check this application inside our browser. Great. Enter your first name, and you can see, as always, we have hello, and we do not have any name. Therefore, it is stranger, just like we have set. I'm going to enter my name as Daniel, and let us see. And you can see here, immediately we have hello Daniel. Great. You can even say code with Daniel, and you can see here is hello code with Daniel. That has been the last example of useState. I hope you have mastered useState using these 3 basic examples. If you've enjoyed this series, ensure you subscribe and share. Also, you can provide some comments. Write comments on what you'd like to see next. Thank you for watching.